everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Let's Talk series. Previously, we've done some Let's Talks episodes about marijuana, about alcohol, about addiction, and especially how those are especially harmful to young people. So I'm glad that you're here today for our Let's Talk about mental health. Before I start, let me introduce myself. My name is Shari Egeland. I am the Associate Director on the Youth Programs. Omni Youth Programs is an independent organization, a nonprofit organization in Sacramento, California. And our focus, our mission, is to prevent youth use of alcohol, drugs, marijuana, especially. We're dealing with that a lot now in California. But we're really focused on preventing youth use of those substances. So today, when I'm talking about mental illness and, well, not really mental illness, but mental issues, especially anxiety and stress, that's what we're going to talk about today, anxiety and stress. I'm really talking about why those are especially difficult for young people and why young people seem to experience more anxiety and stress. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why it can be tempting to use alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs to kind of treat that anxiety. It's really tempting because it seems like it works. We're going to talk about, though, what's really going on in your brain and why that doesn't work. And then we're going to end with some tips and some suggestions on how not only you can help your own anxiety and stress, but maybe what you can do to help those that you care about or those people in your life. So again, we're going to start off today talking about those two topics that are really kind of rushing right now, anxiety and stress. People's anxiety and stress, especially young people, is at an all-time high right now. With the COVID and quarantining and lack of being able to be social with people, stress is really up there. And now you're combining that with holidays. Holidays is normally a stressful time. But with the quarantine and stuff just always in the news and in our faces and in our minds and in our worries, because people, really are suffering from that. And that is stressful. It's supposed to be stressful. But what can you do about that? Especially if you are quarantined and you don't have interaction and you don't have access to the resources that you normally do. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So let's go back to the topic of today, anxiety and stress. What is anxiety and stress? Well, imagine that you're about to take a test or star in the school play, or you're in the basketball team and you have to make the game-winning free throw because time's out. That's what's going to happen there is anxiety and stress. But it can also be things like maybe your friend is mad at you, or sometimes the worst is when something really embarrassing is out there about you on social media. Anxiety and stress are what naturally happens. That's what I want to say first is if you feel anxiety and stress in those situations and in others, that's normal. It seems in today's world that we have to be happy all the time. If you look at people's Insta posts and even all those social media influencers, they only post things that are positive and happy. And we just as normal individuals do that too. So if you're scanning social media, it can seem like there's this pressure to always be happy, always be up. But you know what? That's not normal. That's not a normal way to live. What's normal is to have moments when you feel sad. Have moments when you're stressed and when you're anxious. That's totally normal. Happiness is one of the many emotions that you can experience during the day. And sometimes people say, I'm good, I'm fine, and you may be, but it's also okay not to be. What causes stress and anxiety can be different for everybody. The levels of stress and anxiety that you feel can also be different for everybody. But today we're going to talk about a little bit of the brain science behind why do we feel stress? Why does stress happen? Why can't stress just not go? Why can't it just go away forever? Why do we have to have stress and anxiety? There actually is a reason. And that brain science that I'm going to talk about is really in hopes that it can help you, because if you understand why something's happening to you, sometimes that's the first step in understanding what to do about it, right? If something just happens out of nowhere and we don't understand what's going on, that itself can cause panic. Why is this happening to me? What's going on? So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to quote some experts today. One of them I want to give a shout out to is Karen Williams. She's a wonderful speaker. about especially adolescent and young brain development, and in terms of what our bodies do when we do experience anxiety and stress. She's a really good person to check out if you want to check her out online. Again, that's Karen Williams. I've listened to her at different conferences and webinars. She has articles and books that she's written, but I'm going to be quoting a lot of the stuff I learned from her. I'm also going to be quoting another really good resource that I would suggest to you. It's something called NAMI. It's NAMI. It's a really good organization. NAMI stands for the National Association on Mental Illness. They have a lot of really good resources and tips on what you can do, especially during these quarantine times. But before we dive in too much, let's talk about what is the difference between stress and anxiety? Because we kind of say them like they go together or they're the same thing, and they do often go together, but they're not the same thing. Generally, stress is a reaction to something that's happening externally or outside of us, such as a tight deadline at work or having an argument with a friend. Something happens and someone subsides a situation that needs to be resolved. And sometimes once the situation is resolved, like the play is over or the game is over, the stress goes away. Not always, but sometimes. Anxiety, though, instead of it being an external cause, it's an internal thing. Anxiety is a specific person's reaction to what's going on with them. It's kind of a way to say it. It's like it's a persistent feeling of kind of apprehension, insecurity, or even dread. And sometimes we can have anxiety when there's no real threat right in front of us. Why am I just sitting here feeling anxious? I'm just sitting home watching Netflix. Why am I anxious right now? So it can be kind of confusing. But unlike stress, anxiety a lot of times persists even if we do have a situation that causes anxiety. It doesn't always go away. So we are going to talk later about what we can do when we kind of feel that surge of anxiety, because stress and anxiety do have a purpose. It's good that we have them, believe it or not. We need them as humans, as animals that are surviving and alive on this planet. But stress and anxiety are a demand that's put on the body. Think about, something basic like a deer in the forest or the woods, and it's kind of taking a break and taking a little sip out of a creek or something. And all of a sudden it hears something it thinks might be a mountain lion, or it smells something, or hears the bushes kind of, wrinkle around a little bit. That surge of stress and anxiety is a survival thing for that deer. If there is a mountain lion coming, his instincts need to tell him that so he can run or he can fight. And we're going to talk about that fight or flight thing a little more later. But it can be a little bit more difficult because back in the day when humans were first around, there was a lot more dangers like that. There really was animals out that could hurt you. Before electricity, the nighttime was a very dangerous time. We need that stress and anxiety. But today, a lot of that stress and anxiety is still around. We don't have to worry about getting mauled by a lion on the way to work, but we do have a lot of other stresses that are going on. So in response to stress, your body and your brain produces chemicals and hormones that kind of help you deal with those stressful situations. Some of the physical things you might notice when you're anxious or stressed, this happens to everybody. Your blood sugar goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your heart starts to beat really fast, your muscles tense up. These are all totally normal reactions, and they vary kind of depending on the level of stress. But here's the thing. This is something that's really important and why we're really focused on young people today. Our DNA gives our brains 25 years to develop. A lot of time people used to think, hey, when my body's done growing, 16, 17, 18, my brain's done growing. Not true. Your brain grows a lot actually between the ages of 10 and 24, and in those teen years specifically, it's growing a lot. Now, the good part of that is that when your brain is still growing during those years, you can process information, check this out, 50 to 80 times faster than somebody whose brain is fully developed after the age of 25. My brain, for instance. If you're between the ages of 10 and 24, you can process information and you can learn things quicker and you can remember things better than somebody that's, say, my age. And that's good because it's really good for being adventurous and finding out, what you want to be when you grow up and gaining independence. That's why that surge is there. But here's the tricky part. Remember how I said it's developing till 25? The part of the brain that's really rapidly developing during those teen and young 20s is the prefrontal cortex. What does the prefrontal cortex do? It equips you with how to deal with things like how to regulate our emotions, how to control our impulses, how to shift or adjust and do things when situations change. If you're sitting here and you're under the age of 25, your brain has not developed fully the way to deal with that. Here's another way to think of it. When you're born, only about 25% of your brain is developed. Only 25%. The other 75% of your brain is waiting to be developed through learning and experiences and things that we call habits. You hear habits? That's what that means. 75% is still waiting to be through your experiences and things. In fact, when you're young, the part of the brain that registers pleasure is way more developed and much more active than the part of the brain that actually is kind of like, it's like the gas and the brake. You know, when you're driving, you have the gas and the brake. Well, the gas part of your brain, when you're a young person, a teenager, early 20s, is really just going strong. You got a huge gas pedal and you got pedal to the metal. But you know what isn't developed is the brake. The part of your body that says, oh, hold on, let's slow things down. That part is not developed really at all. So that's why the teen years can be especially hard for managing anxiety and stress. And remember, when that 75% is happening, the behaviors and the habits that you do, you're creating those connections in your brain. Like if you think about it, when a baby wakes up in the morning, what do? They don't get out of bed and make themselves coffee and get dressed. No, they lay there and cry because they don't have the skills yet to know what to do. But me, myself, when I woke up this morning, I didn't have to say, like actively think, okay, turn off your alarm, get the covers off of you, put your feet on the floor, walk to the bathroom, brush your teeth. I didn't have to think those things. They just happen. It's kind of automatic. And the reason that is because you do it so many times, your brain just develops that pattern and kind of kicks in. But here's the problem though. We have a lot of stressful situations, especially in the teens and early 20s. Like let's say you're walking into a social situation, a party or something, and you feel that anxiety. Okay, who do I stand with? Do I know anybody here? What do I do right now? If you treat that anxiety with a puff of, say, marijuana or a drink of alcohol, you're actually stopping your brain from being able to develop those habits to deal with those feelings of stress and anxiety, which is so important. Alcohol and drugs actually can kind of create a false sense that we've solved the problem of stress and anxiety when we actually haven't. Even worse, when addiction kicks in and drug loses its potency, which happens the more you use, the less potent a drug feels when you use it, especially marijuana, alcohol, things like that. You're actually left feeling more anxiety and stress than somebody who has not used alcohol or drugs, which is something interesting. I'll tell you why that is in just a minute. But remember, the brain's still developing till 25. So that's why stress and anxiety in that type of social situation, for instance, are felt so much more strongly in young people. NAMI actually says, the young years are so important. They actually say that 50% of all lifetime mental illness is developed by the age of 14. And 75% of mental illness is developed by the age of 24. That's kind of astounding. I was totally shocked when I heard that. I did not ever realize that that was true. This is also why if you use drugs before your brain's fully developed, like use alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, whatever your drug of choice is, if you use that drug when your brain is in this critical stage of development, your chances of addiction in adulthood are anywhere from 50 to 80%. And if you wait until, let's say 21, 25 would be even better, but I'll settle for 21. If you wait till you're 21, your chances of addiction in adulthood go down to about 10%. That's because you're letting your brain develop normally and naturally and in a healthy way during that critical period. At the same time, you do have a strong craving for that comfort. Interesting, Karen Williams actually said, because the brain is still growing in young people, teenage and early 20s, if you're hurt or stressed, you actually feel it worse and more strongly than somebody, say, my age or somebody over the age of 25, which I am well over. And at the same time, the craving for some kind of nurturing and comfort is also stronger. So that's why, especially during these times of quarantine, young people are feeling the isolation much stronger than adults are. And not only that, but they're craving that comfort and they're craving that just attention and nurturing. And they're not getting that because a lot of times they're just really isolated. And I know sometimes hugging a teenager, I remember when I was a teenager, I was not always easy to hug, but they need that. And because youth are all about building their brains, really think about it this way. If you take what you know about stress as an adult, say somebody over 25, multiply that by about 10. And that's what stress is like for a teenager. It's a big deal. Here's another interesting fact. Anytime what's happening in our brain is when we're discomforted or we have stress or anxiety, our brain produces something called cortisol. And cortisol is that fight or flight gene that I was talking about, like the deer in the brook, getting something to drink. Cortisol is the fight or flight hormone. It's the hormone that surges in our body when we detect that something bad is about to happen or threatening is happening. And we have to decide whether we're going to stay and fight or whether we're going to run away to save ourselves. And during the younger years, did you know there's an increase in cortisol? As a young person, your body shoots cortisol 2 to 5 times stronger than that of somebody that's older. So basically what that means is you're feeling the emotions much stronger, and that fight or flight urge of something's happening, I need to do something, is stronger. And not only that, but the cortisol feeling stays in your system 2 to 5 times longer. So you feel it stronger and it takes longer for that feeling to subside. So that's why, again, if you're a young person and you are dealing with stress and anxiety and you especially feel that, it's really strong and just things aren't going great. Why am I feeling like this? It's okay. That's normal. The fact that you're feeling like that is totally, totally normal. But here's the problem. We also have a drug called dopamine, and that's kind of the bliss, happy feeling hormone that our body creates. After the cortisol kind of slows down, what kind of is fighting the cortisol is the dopamine. Dopamine can kind of relieve pain. It can make us feel blissful and happy. But drugs, marijuana, alcohol, they can mimic dopamine. Our brain gets confused when we use those substances. Our brain thinks, I have way too much dopamine because this hit of marijuana made a surge of dopamine, made my brain think I had this surge of dopamine. So my brain says, oh, I got to even things out. I got way too much dopamine. I got to stop making dopamine so things can even out. So that when we're not high anymore and we're sitting in class or something anxious happens, we don't have that reserve of dopamine in our brain to help us. That other people who don't use drugs or alcohol, they have that reserve there to go to. So when young people especially turn to drugs or alcohol to lessen the physical or mental pain they're experiencing, they're kind of giving a false sense that the problem is solved. In fact, it's making it worse. And there's an interesting quote from Dr. Daniel Shamrock that actually said, and I like this, addiction or drug use should actually be called ritualized, compulsive, comfort seeking. Because that's a lot of times what people are doing when they turn to alcohol or drugs. They want to feel better. But keep in mind that using drugs to treat anxiety is kind of like using a Band-Aid to treat a bullet wound. It'll help maybe in the moment or for a second, but it's really not going to do anything to cure it in the long run. Remember, stress is there for a reason, but the other thing that we need in life, we do need stress to mobilize ourselves when there's a threat or when something needs to be handled. But we also desperately need shutdown time. So our brain has a chance to repair itself. Did you know that if somebody has that surge of cortisol and there isn't any kind of coping skills or something that we're actively calming ourselves down, if we just feel that cortisol rush and don't do anything about it, cortisol can actually build up in your brain and become toxic and make it even more difficult for you to deal with anxiety and stress. So we need to do things that kind of fight that cortisol surge and increase our natural dopamine, not with drugs and alcohol, but other things. And the times of quiet are rapidly disappearing. I'm sure you all know that. Screens are everywhere. Immediate gratification is everywhere. I don't even have to go for just a quiet drive to go to the grocery store or go get food or dinner anymore. I can have it delivered to my house in 10 minutes if I want to. So think about all the ways before we had all this technology that we used to have a lot more quiet time, a lot more downtime. basically now our brains are not getting that. So what can you do to help your brain and body deal with stress more, to where it feels more comfortable, to where stress doesn't feel so overwhelming? Because again, you're not going to get rid of stress. That's not life. But you can help yourself not be so stressed. One of the things to do that's really important is first learn to recognize when you're feeling stressed. Because again, with all the distractions and the screens and all the stuff going on, sometimes we don't even realize when we are stressed. So pay attention to things like if you're noticing your lack of motivation or do things that you normally do, yard work or homework or doing work if you have a job, you just don't really want to do those anymore. You have no feeling of need to do that. You have increasingly low energy. You kind of don't enjoy doing day-to-day things that you used to enjoy. And really, those that are overwhelmed with stress really tend to isolate themselves further. So that's something to keep, that we can kind of watch out for each other right now and help each other with that. Watch our friends when things like that are going on. So once you have noticed that, I will tell you the number one thing that we need right now, the number one thing that really will help your stress, even after COVID's over. Our brains desperately need social connection, especially young brains. They need social connection. And it's hard to get that right now. There's no school, there's no social gatherings. You can't go to a movie or to an amusement park. You can't even a lot of times go to the nearby park. So that's tough, but we have to adapt. We have to work a little harder to find ways that we can do that. That's why something like this is great. Things like Zoom, we can use our computers, but you really do need to socialize at least once a day. Stay in touch with somebody outside your household, because it is important to talk to people you live with, but you need kind of something new. Now I'm going to suggest something that's going to make me sound ancient, but phone calls and a human voice are very important. I know texting is the thing to do now, and who calls anybody anymore? But now, especially during COVID, you need to, instead of typing a text, you need to hit that call button and actually call somebody and talk to them, even if it's for 5 minutes. You don't have to talk about anything serious. You don't have to talk about your stress. You can talk about whatever you watched on Netflix, or the football game you watched, or your brother did something funny, or oh my gosh, can you leave my cat? Look what a weirdo he is. Those things, just talking about those things and having an interaction with the other person reduces your stress in the long run. Especially during these quarantine times, we need to hear that human voice. We need social contact and social support every day. And if you want to talk about your stress, that's even better. If you're comfortable to do that. Some of you may know about, things like group therapy or AA. The reason those things are so effective is they've actually done brain scans that show when we talk about our feelings, especially our negative feelings, our stress and anxiety that are related to those negative feelings actually go away. We don't have to have advice or a solution or anything. All we have to do is talk about it to make that stress go away. Another thing that I know is going to be so boring because you hear this all the time, but you have to sleep, you have to eat, and you have to get some form of exercise. Even if it's going out in the backyard and walking around a little bit, just getting some fresh air, getting that vitamin D on your skin from the sun. And sleeping is so important. And that goes to the next thing, routine. Routine is another thing. If we have a routine, our brains are less stressed. That's proven throughout life. And what routine is, setting an alarm to get up at the same time every day, even if you don't have work or school. Pick a time, doesn't matter what time it is, but pick a time. Don't just wake up naturally, set a time. I get up at this time, I go to bed at this time. And I eat at this and this and this time. Schedule your eating. I know snacking is that's tempting during quarantine, and there's nothing wrong with snacking, but you want your fruits and vegetables and your kind of protein to happen at the same time every day. Just doing that is going to relieve a lot of your stress. And don't forget about seeking help. There are a lot of resources out there, and what I'm going to do right now in the comment section is actually put some of those resources down. I just posted those there. There's a lot of crisis lines and a lot of networks where you can research, where you can get some localized help, because there are a lot of therapists that are still helping people. Just because you can't go to their office doesn't mean you can't get help. You can get help a lot of times over the phone. Sometimes there's texts even. There's apps out there now where you can text somebody if you're feeling anxious or stressed. So those resources will really help you with that. And if you need a specific resource, please feel free to contact me. I put my email in the description of our talk here. It's Shari, SHARI, at omniyouth.net. And actually, I'll go ahead and put that in there too. If you want to email me, I'm going to put that in the chat right now. If there is a specific resource that you need or more information that you think will help, please email me. I'd love to do that. Now, to wrap up today, I'm going to just tell you some quick things you can do if you feel that surge of anxiety coming over you and you just want that feeling to go away. It kind of feels like a fire that needs to be put out. One thing you can do if you're feeling a surge of anxiety is close your eyes and be quiet. Make sure there's no TVs on, no phones, no music, and listen to the natural sounds that are around you, but focus on the sounds one at a time. Do you hear a bird? Do you hear your dog drinking out of the water bowl in the other room? Do you hear the wind? Do you hear kids laughing or playing outside? Just focusing on sounds that are happening around you actually has a calming effect on our brains. Another thing, again, that Karen Williams talks about is something called a 4x4. Here's what you do. You do 4 things. It's 4x4 breathing. The first thing you do is you breathe in for 4 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you hold the breath for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you release the breath slowly for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the fourth thing, you just sit quietly for 4 seconds. And then you do it again. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Breathe out for 4, exhale for 4 seconds, then do nothing. Do you know that actually, if you do that, you can stop the cortisol from your brain from developing. You can actually stop cortisol by doing that 4x4 breathing. And another thing to do is if you think of something and you are feeling anxiety, another trick that a lot of experts teach is called identifying and evaluating. So you want to identify the thought. What thought just went through my head? Why am I feeling this way? What happened? Was I predicting something? Was I picturing something that's going to happen? Was I remembering something? What was I telling myself? Was I thinking like a worst case scenario type thing? And then once you kind of identify what triggered that anxiety, think about, well, is what I'm telling myself actually true? How true is it? Like 0 to 100. What do you think? Is there any other way to think about this? If it is true, how helpful is it for me to dwell on this? How much power do I have over this? What's the, best, worst response? And then once you kind of figure that out, you can respond and sometimes change your old thought, and that can calm you down. Now, lastly, I want to finish with, those are things you can do for yourself, but what can you do for those around you that you care about? Again, I can't emphasize enough. Make phone calls, call people, check in, see how they're doing. And again, an old ancient thing, write notes. You can write letters. There's something about a handwritten letter that seems much more intimate and comforting than a text or an email or typing that you see on a screen. Writing a quick note and popping that in what they call snail mail actually is really helpful for other people. When you do talk or communicate, acknowledge the good things that those are doing. Even though you think about only like young kids that need to be told they're doing a good job, but we need to be told that all the time, even for small things. Like, hey, you showed a lot of determination getting that done. Good for you. And stating that you appreciate them. Oh, I really appreciate that you called. I know that was an effort and I appreciate that. It was a big help. Pointing out when they do something cool. You have such patience with your little sister. You have to tell me how you do that. And offer compliments, even over little things. Doesn't have to be like, oh, you're gorgeous or oh, you're perfect, but things like, hey, that's really cool that you went to work today, even though you didn't feel like it. You were feeling kind of down, but you pushed through. That's really cool. I want to talk about how you do that because I have trouble with that. And again, expressing care and comfort. You don't want to say things like, oh, you'll be okay. Things will be all right. Stuff will turn around. That doesn't really help. I know that the emotion behind that is helping, but it doesn't really help. Just listen. You don't have to solve the problem. Just listen and express empathy. I can see why that would be really hard. If that happened to me, I would be upset too. I totally understand that. We sometimes feel pressure that we have to solve a problem, but we don't. We just have to listen. And just ask them what you can do. I would really like to help you. I can tell you're maybe needing help, or I feel like you need help. Do you need help? Ask them, and then say, is there anything I can do right now that would help you? And again, just that one-on-one contact is so important right now. We need to look out for each other. We need to look out for our neighbors, for our friends, as our community members, like they used to back in the day when people had villages and small towns and people used to sit out on their front porch and look out for each other. We really need to try to do that again. Well, that's all for my talk for today. I really encourage you again, if you are having issues, if you just feel like, try some of the tips I gave, but sometimes anxiety and stress, it's just too much to handle on your own. And that's also completely normal. We all need help, right? We all need help. And please look at some of those resources. You can also go to omniyouth.net. We have a really good resource page for especially young people. Some of those apps that I told you about are pretty cool. They have a lot of pretty cool mental health apps out there. But again, I encourage you to check that out. And again, please contact me anytime with questions you have. And I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. And what would be cool if everybody listening today actually picked up their phone and called somebody that they haven't talked to in a while, just to see how they're doing. What a great way to kick off the holiday season. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.